Genzopedia presents a reading of the Genzo Suikoden IV novelization by Takase Mie. Volume 1, first released September 10th, 2005. Chapter 2: The Pirate Brandeau. The nightly duties that began the following day were, as expected, monotonous. Day after day, they delivered cargo to nearby Middleport or hunted small monsters that roamed the local waters. Trivial tasks that seemed endless. The rookie knights attacked their assignments with enthusiasm at first, but as the missions repeated, complaints inevitably surfaced. This is so boring, Jewel and Pal would groan, venting openly, which felt somewhat cathartic to witness. But Lazlo found his attention drawn more to Snowe than to his carefree companions. Unlike Jewel, the exemplary Snowe never complained publicly about their duties. Yet Lazlo sensed his growing dissatisfaction, quiet but persistent. In private moments, Snowe would confide, "These menial tasks are dulling the skills we worked so hard to develop. Does the commander still think we're children?" Lazlo's reassurances that this was normal for rookies did little to lift Snowe's mood. Having grown up pampered and addressed as young master, Snowe had reached what seemed the pinnacle of his confidence during the brilliant kindling ritual. The subsequent descent into mundane patrols left him predictably restless. About a month into these tedious routines, Lazlo and Snowe were summoned to the commander's audience chamber after completing their daily assignments. "Lucky you," Jewel said enviously when she heard. "You must be getting an important mission. Nobody gets called to the audience chamber for nothing." "We don't know that yet," Snowe replied modestly, though his face betrayed his confidence. His expression clearly revealed his swelling anticipation. Lazlo couldn't help sharing in the excitement, wondering what task might await them. 4 figures awaited them in the audience chamber. Commander Glenn and Vice Commander Katerina stood near the front, alongside Snowe's father, Lord Fingerhut. The fourth was a stranger to Lazlo, a young man with a completely shaved head. He looked approachable enough, but behind his glasses, his eyes were unexpectedly sharp, betraying a keen intellect. The man glanced at Snowe and Lazlo with a troubled expression, then looked towards Glenn. Katerina broke the silence with a gentle smile. "Thank you both for your patrol work. We have a new assignment for you. This is Mr. Ramada from Orark Maritime Trade, who needs an escort for a cargo shipment to Ilia Island." "Excuse me," Ramada cut in hesitantly. "These two as escorts? They seem rather young." "No need to worry," Katerina replied. "Despite their age, they're fully qualified knights." "But Ilia is quite distant. Pirates could attack." "They've trained on the Ilia route during navigation exercises," Katerina said firmly. "Even against pirates, knights with rune cannons would prevail." Ramada nodded. "If you say so." Lazlo and Snowe exchanged glances, hearts pounding. This was their first significant mission. Ilia lay northeast of Razril. They had visited during training, but the journey was long and would require a proper voyage. Escorting a merchant vessel would demand far more than their usual coastal patrols. Ramada smiled warmly at Snowe and Lazlo.
Spices from the south have become quite popular in Ilia lately. We're planning to transport a large shipment and turn a nice profit. The only problem is the sea monsters that appear along that route. We don't want to make the voyage unprotected.
Leave it to us, Snow said firmly, standing tall. We've been to Ilia multiple times during our navigation exercises. Commander Glenn spoke in his usual stern tone.
Snow, you'll serve as the ship's captain. Lazlo, you'll be his assistant. Protect the merchant ship at all costs.
Yes, sir. Lord Fingerhut, Snow's father, stroked his moustache with a somewhat dissatisfied expression.
Isn't this a rather simple task? My son might find it underwhelming. If he were given command on the front lines, his true abilities would shine.
With respect,
Commander Glenn replied.
even simple missions are necessary for your son's growth.
Though polite, his emphasis on simple hinted at slight irritation. Yet Lord Fingerhut remained unfazed, laughing magnanimously as he addressed his son.
Well, that's how it is. It may seem beneath you, but don't slack off. Carry it out thoroughly.
Yes, sir. Snow nodded crisply and turned back to Ramada. Though we're inexperienced, please rest assured we'll give this mission our utmost effort. Squinting slightly, Ramada said to Lord Fingerhut,
What a fine young man you have.
And the Lord chuckled in satisfaction. Then, Snow, should any problem arise, you may contact us via Nacellbird, Katerina began. Snow quickly nodded. Understood, I'll handle all communications. The brief exchange made Lazlo's heart skip a beat. The Knights of Gaian used Nacellbirds for their messages. Small, docile creatures with remarkable flight capabilities that could travel between islands without rest, perfect for carrying documents. Their existence was classified information, not to be disclosed to outsiders. Lazlo couldn't believe Katerina and Snow had mentioned them in front of Ramada.
Nacellbird?
Ramada asked, his curiosity piqued. Glenn cleared his throat, changing the subject.
Both of you, prepare for a long journey. You set sail early tomorrow morning.
Yes, sir. Snow and Lazlo answered in unison before leaving the audience chamber. The merchant vessel from Orark Maritime Trade set sail the next morning with Snow commanding the escort ship. Their journey proved uneventful. Just a few small sea monsters to dispatch along the way. Nothing Snow and Lazlo couldn't handle without calling on the other soldiers. Clear skies stretched above them, and favourable winds filled their sails as the two ships cut through calm waters towards Ilia Island. The morning after their departure, Snow broke the silence. Lazlo, there's something I need to tell you. Lazlo had been scanning the ocean through his telescope, searching for suspicious shadows. Hearing the serious tone in Snow's voice, he lowered the instrument. Ramada said the cargo on the ship was spices, right? That it was for profit on Ilia Island. Yeah, he did. But I happened to see something. Snow glanced at the Orark Maritime Trade merchant vessel sailing alongside them. While walking around the port before departure, that ship's cargo isn't spices at all. He lowered his voice. They were carrying containers for rune shells. And not just small ones. These were more than 10 times the size of what we use in training exercises. If they fired something like that, even the largest ships would be sunk in a single shot. Lazlo's eyes widened. Snow avoided his gaze, leaning against the ship's rail with his face turned downward. I think they're arms smugglers, Snow said quietly. If that's true, we could end up in a real fight. Do you think we're actually ready for something like that? Why? Lazlo stepped closer, trying to catch Snow's eye. Why would you keep something this important from me? What choice did I have? If I'd admitted I saw the cargo and then refused the assignment, I would have disgraced the Knights of Gaian. I couldn't let anyone think I was backing down out of fear. Snow turned away with his typical stubbornness. Lazlo sighed inwardly. This was Snow true and true. Proud, competitive to a fault, and terrified of being seen as weak. Usually these qualities drove him to excel, but now they were putting them all at risk. Falsifying cargo manifests when requesting night escorts was a serious offence. Snow had to know this, yet he'd let his pride override his judgment and stayed silent. Lazlo gazed at the Auroch maritime trade vessel, a knot forming in his stomach. A small bird darted through the open window of the commander's room. Glenn extended his hand, allowing the creature to settle on his forearm. He carefully untied the thin scroll attached to its leg, his brow furrowing as he read the message. Is something wrong, Commander? Katerina asked, noting his expression.
It's from the patrol boat.
Glenn passed her the message, watching as her face fell. A six-masted ship, she said quietly. Brandeau. Do you think he's after the Auroch vessel?
It's possible. It's good that we sent Lazlo. Snow wouldn't manage alone if trouble starts.
But, Commander, I thought you trusted Snow. Why make him captain if...
What choice did I have? Glenn cut her off with a grunt, his frown deepening. Not with Lord Fingerhut standing right there.
Lord Fingerhut's financial backing gave him considerable sway over the Knight's operations. Ever since Snow had joined their ranks, his father's meddling had only intensified. Glenn found it maddening, but what choice did he have? The Knight's orders' coffers wouldn't fill themselves.
Speaking of indiscretions,
Glenn said, stroking the small bird perched on his arm with calloused fingers.
What possessed you to mention nacelle birds in front of a merchant?
Katerina's posture stiffened. Commander, I apologize for my carelessness.
Damn it all. That man Ramada, did you notice his expression? The last thing we need is outsiders taking interest in our communications.
Glenn released the bird through the open window, watching as it beat its wings powerfully and disappeared over the sea. His gaze lingered there as he spoke.
Something isn't right about this. Vice Commander, ready a swift vessel. Nothing too large. I'll take a small crew and follow them.
You're sailing out yourself, sir?
Yes, it's probably nothing, but... Glenn frowned. My gut tells me otherwise. I need to catch up with Lazlo and the others.
The fact that he'd referred to them as Lazlo and the others, rather than acknowledging Snow as captain, spoke volumes about where his true concerns lay. Katerina snapped a crisp salute and hurried from the room. A tense cry suddenly rang out from the crow's nest. Ship sighted! 6 masts! It's a 6-masted ship! The lookout's voice cracked with fear. Lazlo grabbed his telescope and raised it to his eye. Through the circular lens, a dark shape emerged from the haze. Adjusting the focus, he confirmed what he dreaded. 6 tall masts rising from a massive hull. The vessel had spotted them too and was already changing course. Brandeau's pirates. Jules' warnings echoed in his mind. Their legendary cruelty, their brutality, their complete lack of mercy. Lazlo turned to Snow for orders. His friend's face had drained of colour, his jaw clenched tight. Lazlo had never seen him so rigid with fear. Enemy approaching fast! No identification flag! Captain, your orders! Another shout from above. Before Snow could respond, a bright flash erupted from the pirate ship's flank. A chill shot down Lazlo's spine. It's coming. The next instant, a thunderous impact rocked their vessel, throwing him violently across the deck. Starboard hit! Captain, we need orders! A knight's desperate cry cut through the chaos. Lazlo pushed himself up, still on his hands and knees. Snow had fallen nearby. Lazlo scrambled over, heart racing. Snow, are you hurt? Snow's face twisted in agony as he clutched his arm. Oh, my arm! It hurts! Lazlo examined it quickly. No blood, no visible fracture, yet Snow's face was ashen. Probably just bruised or sprained. When Lazlo reached to help him up, Snow jerked away. Don't touch me! Can't you see it hurts? I'm sorry, but you need medical attention. A nearby knight leaned over, eyeing Snow with confusion. Snow just gritted his teeth and groaned, clearly incapable of issuing commands. The second rune shell hit with even greater force than the first. The ship lurched violently, sending everyone sprawling across the deck. Ah! Snow's scream rose above all others. Most knights scrambled back to their feet, but some remained motionless. Lazlo's gaze fell on a knight directly in front of him, head twisted at an impossible angle, eyes vacant and lifeless. A choked sound escaped Snow's throat. He collapsed to his knees, eyes wide and fixed on the dead soldier. Terror froze his features so completely that Lazlo swore he could hear Snow's teeth chattering. Captain, your orders! Several knights rushed over. Full helm to port! Snow shouted. Full speed retreat! Lazlo couldn't believe what he was hearing. The knights exchanged stunned glances. Captain? Turn the rudder! We need to escape!
Snow's voice cracked as his composure shattered.
Hurry! Move! But sir, that would abandon the Orark vessel, one knight protested. We're their escort. Doesn't matter! Just get us out of here! Snow's face contorted with desperation. What are you waiting for? That's an order from your captain! The soldiers stood frozen in disbelief. Every man aboard was a Gaian knight, forged through years of rigorous discipline. They all understood that abandoning a defenseless merchant ship to save themselves was unthinkable, a betrayal of everything they stood for. All understood, except Snow. One of the knights turned to Lazlo, desperation in his eyes. Vice Captain, your orders, please! The crew's attention shifted to him as Snow curled inward, clutching his arm. Lazlo bit his lip, glancing down at his childhood friend. This was the moment he'd always feared would come. Back in training exercises, Snow had always shined, making smart calls when the stakes were imaginary. But now, with death in the air and blood on the deck, that familiar weakness surfaced at the worst possible moment. "Prepare for battle," Lazlo said, his voice finding strength. "Ready to ship for combat." Relief washed over the knights' faces. "Yes, sir!" They snapped to attention before rushing to their stations, grateful for clear direction. Snow looked up, tears welling in his eyes. "Don't go over my head! I'm still the captain here!" "You're injured," Lazlo replied firmly. "Rest." Without waiting for a response, he sprinted towards the bow. Though he'd never commanded a vessel before, Commander Glenn's lessons echoed in his mind. Never let them see or fear. A captain's doubt becomes the crew's panic. "Enemy rune cannon spotted!" a lookout shouted. "They're loaded with fire and lightning elements." Lazlo's mind raced through the 5-element wheel he'd memorized years ago. Water defeats fire, earth absorbs lightning. The natural counters were clear. "Load water and earth shells," he commanded. "Ready the rune cannons." "Yes, sir." The cannon crews scrambled to their stations with practiced efficiency, each team moving to the weapons aligned with their elemental training. "Bait their fire," Lazlo called. "The moment they launch, counter with water. On it." When the enemy vessel belched flame across the waves, the Gaian gunners were ready. Their water shell launched almost simultaneously, meeting the fire mid-air. The elements collided in a hissing cloud of steam. Following nature's law, water consumed fire completely before continuing onward to strike the pirate ship. Lazlo raised his telescope, watching as the enemy's mainmast began to tilt at an unnatural angle, damaged by the direct hit. "Keep firing," he ordered, a surge of confidence in his voice. "Don't let up." "Yes, sir." The crew, energized by their success, sent another shot screaming across the water. It struck true, bringing the pirate ship's mainmast crashing down completely. "Victory, Vice Captain!" The crew cheered. Lazlo scanned the deck, but Snow was nowhere to be seen. Perhaps he'd retreated below, unable to bear the pain in his arm. A young knight came running up, his face flushed. "Vice Captain, the emergency boat is missing." "What?" Lazlo's stomach dropped. "Someone fled, like a coward." The knight's voice trembled with anger before he caught himself and bowed. "Forgive my outburst, sir." Snow had abandoned ship. A wave of dread washed over Lazlo. Abandoning the merchant vessel alone would have been a grave dereliction of duty, but to desert their own ship as well? Snow's reputation would be destroyed beyond salvation. Lazlo wanted to understand how his friend could do something so foolish, but Snow was gone. "Vice Captain, enemy ship approaching fast!" The soldier's shout yanked Lazlo back to reality. The massive vessel, its masts now shattered, barreled towards them with reckless determination. Their intent couldn't be clearer. Board and overwhelmed them in hand-to-hand combat. No time remained to deploy the anti-boarding nets. "Brace yourselves, draw weapons," Lazlo called out, unsheathing his own blade with a metallic ring. The ships collided with a thunderous crack. Lazlo clutched the railing, fighting to keep his footing as the deck lurched beneath him. "They're boarding! I see them coming across!" The warning died in the soldier's throat. Lazlo spun toward the device just in time to see the man topple forward, 3 thin blades jutting from his back. The other knights froze, confusion turning to horror as they instinctively backed away. A high-pitched laugh cut through the chaos, sending chills down Lazlo's spine. He raised his eyes to the source and saw a figure stepping onto their deck. A tall man stood at the boarding point, his silhouette dark against the sky, radiating menace. Brandeau, the infamous pirate himself. A wave of cold dread washed over Lazlo, nearly rooting him to the spot. Brandeau stood before them, a middle-aged man with pale hair swept back from his weathered face. A black eye patch covered his right eye, likely lost in some distant battle, while his remaining left eye gleamed with unmistakable madness. The Gaian knights gripped their weapons tightly and stepped backwards, overwhelmed by his mere presence. Lazlo's mouth went dry, the attack commands dying in his throat. "Forgive me, Master Brandeau," came that high-pitched voice again. "It seems I'm keeping all the excitement for myself." A small, hunched figure emerged from behind the pirate captain. The man had unnaturally large eyes and carried no visible weapons, no sword, no spear. Lazlo wondered briefly if such a frail-looking person could even fight. Then, the man's right hand moved in a blur. The soldier beside Lazlo dropped without a sound, a thin blade buried in his chest. An assassin. The realization hit Lazlo instantly. A master of concealed weapons, striking silently with blades small enough to hide between fingers. Rage surged through Lazlo's veins. Every second of hesitation would cost another life. "Attack! Don't falter!" Lazlo shouted, lunging forward toward the assassin. He needed to neutralize this dangerous little man before confronting Brandeau. A blade whistled through the air from the assassin's hand. Lazlo swung his sword desperately, knocking it aside with a metallic clang. The soldiers, who had frozen at Brandeau's overwhelming presence, found their courage again seeing Lazlo's bold charge. In seconds, the deck erupted into chaotic combat. Brandeau's massive sword cut through the knights with terrifying speed and power. Bodies fell, but the Gaian knights refused to yield. They stepped over their fallen comrades, shouting battle cries to steel themselves as they pressed their attack. After a fierce struggle, Lazlo managed to subdue the assassin and turned to face Brandeau. Even the fearsome pirate couldn't withstand their numbers forever. Surrounded by a dozen knights with swords pointed, Brandeau stood cornered, his chest heaving with exhaustion. "Surrender, pirate! It's over!" a knight shouted, triumph ringing in his voice. Brandeau's single eye swept across the knights. Despite his clear defeat, Lazlo shivered. Something in the pirate's gaze told him this man would fight until his final breath. Then, unexpectedly, Brandeau's sword hand fell loose at his side. His composure, almost casual, caught Lazlo off guard. With deliberate slowness, the pirate raised his left hand and peeled off his glove. "Master Brandeau, is that..." The assassin's terrified voice cracked. He'd been sprawled on the deck, exhausted, but now scrambled to his feet, desperate to escape. "Hey, where do you think you're going?" A knight lunged to grab him, but the assassin twisted violently, breaking free. Lazlo's attention fixed on Brandeau's exposed hand as it began to emit an eerie glow. An explosive? His spine tingled with dread. No, the light came from the pirate's flesh itself, pulsing with fierce radiance. "Run, you fools! We'll all be ash!" The assassin's scream carried across the deck. Through the rising chaos, Lazlo heard Brandeau's quiet words. "All of you, die." Light exploded from the pirate's hand. The assassin's scream cut short. Lazlo threw his arms up instinctively, but not before the horrific sight burned into his vision. Bodies, the assassin and knights alike, crumbling to black dust that scattered like mist on the sea breeze. The blast threw Lazlo backward. Pain tore through him as if his body were being ripped apart. He squeezed his eyes shut, bracing against the sensation. "Commander, look there!" a knight called out, pointing. Glenn followed the man's gesture, scanning the waves. A small boat drifted in the distance, its lone occupant frantically waving both arms.
Is that Snow?
Glenn squinted in disbelief. The appointed captain, alone in that tiny vessel? His stomach tightened. Had the ship gone down? Were Lazlo and the others already lost to the depths? Teeth clenched against a wave of dread. Glenn ordered a rescue. Minutes later, Snow stood on deck before him, relief washing over the young man's face. "Commander, thank goodness you're here," he blurted. "Our ship, it was attacked by the ship-masted pirate. We must hurry, the battle still rages." Glenn's eyes narrowed as he looked down at Snow.
Why did you abandon your ship?
He asked, each word heavy with authority. What? Snow's stammered response hung in the air as he instinctively clutched the arm he'd been waving moments before. I was injured. My arm. I couldn't move it. Snow cradled his arm protectively, the lie transparent. Glenn's anger boiled over.
You abandoned ship in the middle of battle? You abandoned your duties as captain?
I had no choice. My arm, it wouldn't move.
You fool!
Glenn's open palm cracked against Snow's cheek. The boy crumpled to the deck.
You left your crew behind and you fled your own ship as captain? Have you no shame? A captain's fate is tied to his vessel. To abandon it before the end is unforgivable.
But... Snow's face dissolved into tears. Gone was the confident, exemplary student, replaced by a pitiful child cowering at Glenn's feet. My arm! I couldn't use it! I swear! Look! Snow grabbed his left wrist, twisting his face into an exaggerated grimace of pain. Glenn let out a heavy sigh. No point in pushing this further. Looking at the boy, he couldn't escape his own culpability. He'd put too much responsibility on shoulders too young and untested. Lazlo's face flashed in his mind, bringing a sharp ache to his chest. Unlike Snow, Lazlo had always worked quietly in the background, showing a steadiness beyond his years. As commander of the Knights, Glenn had developed a connection with him that went beyond rank or age, something born from a shared understanding of life at sea. Though he maintained proper distance in front of the other trainees, in his heart he had come to think of Lazlo almost as a son. "Don't die," he murmured, his eyes fixed on the dark waters. A low groaning reached Lazlo's ears. He opened his eyes to see the pirate Brandeau huddled on the deck, trembling as if gripped by fever, his once menacing left hand now dim and powerless. Lazlo tested his limbs. The bruises stung, but his bones were intact. Scanning the deck, he found it empty save for himself and Brandeau. The dozen knights and even the assassin had simply vanished. This was no nightmare. They had truly turned to dust before his eyes. Why had he survived? Why was he merely bruised when others had been obliterated? Lazlo retrieved his fallen sword and rose to his feet, his legs surprisingly steady beneath him. Brandeau lifted his head, seeing Lazlo standing,
his face contorted with disbelief.
What? You're still alive?
The pirate glanced at his own left hand, then fixed Lazlo with a hateful glare.
Are you next?
Though Brando's voice rasped weakly, Lazlo could sense the man's fighting spirit remained unbroken. He tightened his grip on his sword. With visible effort, Brandeau pulled himself upright.
So be it. I'll drag you to hell with me.
Lazlo raised his sword, mind racing. What was that blinding light? Had the assassin and soldiers truly vanished into dust? Questions burned in his throat, but there was no time. Brandeau's eyes gleamed with murderous intent.
Prepare yourself,
the pirate growled. Brandeau lunged forward with savage strikes. Lazlo's body reacted before his mind could, dodging sideways and swinging his blade across the pirate's exposed back. Blood sprayed across the deck. Lazlo steadied his breathing, providing reckless counterattacks as he jumped back to maintain his distance. During graduation exercises, the weight of a real sword had terrified him. Now the familiar heft felt reassuring in his palm. This blade alone stood between him and death.
You miserable brat!
Brandeau snarled. The pirate's attacks came with barely a heartbeat between them. Even weakened, Brandeau had earned his fearsome reputation across the island nations. Lazlo marveled at the speed of each successive strike. One direct hit would end everything. He couldn't avoid every blow. His arms and sides burned where steel had found flesh. He stumbled more than once. The wounds were shallow, but his stamina drained with each desperate swing. If he faltered now, the fight would be over. Brandeau was losing ground with each exchange. Lazlo pressed forward, his blade hunting for any opening in the pirate's defense. When Brandeau lunged at Lazlo's quick movements, it left his flank vulnerable to counterattack. The duel had become a desperate struggle for survival. Their swords clashed as both men approached exhaustion, each knowing the first to falter would die. Death's shadow crept closer with each laboured breath. Lazlo couldn't even clear the stinging sweat from his eyes. His vision swam. That mysterious flash should have turned him to dust like the others. His life merely borrowed time. Now even that grace period was ending. His legs would give out soon. As he braced for a final stand, a familiar voice called his name.
Lazlo!
Commander Glenn leaped over the ship's railing and rushed towards him. Seeing his commander, Lazlo's remaining strength abandoned him. His knees buckled, but Glenn's steady arms caught him before he hit the deck.
Hang in there, Lazlo. You fought well. I'll take it from here.
Glenn eased Lazlo down to sit on the deck, drew his sword with a practiced motion, and turned to face Brandeau. The pirate had fallen to his knees almost simultaneously with Lazlo's collapse, his fierce spirit finally broken.
So, this is the end.
Brando's voice came as barely a whisper, his upper body swaying before he slumped forward onto the deck. Was it over? Lazlo allowed himself a moment's relief, but it vanished instantly. A familiar glow emanated from Brando's left hand. Lazlo felt his skin prickle with dread as his eyes widened.
What's happening with that light?
Glenn's voice held a note of weary confusion as he cautiously approached the fallen pirate. "Commander, stay back!" Lazlo tried to warn him, but before the words fully left his mouth, The rune on Brandeau's hand detached itself and rose into the air. The mark hovered between them, an intricate spiral pattern like a conch shell, pulsing with a faint crimson light. Both men stared, transfixed. Without warning, the rune flared brilliantly and shot towards Glenn's left hand like an arrow.
No!
Glenn recoiled, but too late. The rune moved faster than any human reflex. Lazlo watched in horror as it fused to Glenn's hand, transferring itself to a new bearer, just as it had clung to Brandeau. A wild laugh erupted from the pirate's throat. He beat his now ordinary hand against the deck in a feeble rhythm, his body spent.
I'm free. Finally free.
Brandeau lifted his face, eyes gleaming with frenzied light.
Free, Edgar. Kika.
His muttering trailed off as his head dropped. In that instant, his body crumbled to dust. There was no time to process what had happened. Glenn doubled over in agony, clutching his glowing left hand.
What is this?
He cried out. Lazlo froze. He'd never heard such raw pain in the commander's voice before. Not from the man who had always been a pillar of strength and calm. "Commander!" he shouted.
The soldiers from Glenn's ship ran over.
They called out to Glenn as they tried to support him, but he only groaned once more.
Who are you?
He whispered. For a moment, Lazlo thought Glenn was speaking to them. Had the commander lost his ability to recognize his own men? But looking into Glenn's vacant, unfocused eyes, Lazlo realized the truth. The commander was seeing something else entirely, some vision only he could perceive. "Commander," Lazlo's voice trailed off uselessly. Glenn collapsed onto the deck. Around them, soldiers whispered, casting uncertain glances at Lazlo. What happened here? What's going on? Their confusion made sense. Those who hadn't witnessed the earlier events would be completely lost. The ship was eerily empty. No crew, no enemies, not even bodies remained. What had happened? Lazlo wished he knew. In fact, he needed answers more than anyone. What exactly had transpired on this ship?
The story continues in Chapter 3, The Rune's Toll. If you enjoyed this reading, please give a like and a comment so that I know there is enough interest to continue with this novelization and potentially other novelizations such as those for Suikoden 1, 2, and 5, as well as the short story collections and other Suikoden publications. Bye!